Our guest today has written more than a dozen books. I first became familiar with her work when her book, The Summer Kitchen, was chosen as a One Book, One Waco selection. Lisa Wingate is with us today to talk about her newest book, Dandelion Summer. Lisa, good to talk with you again.
Good to be here.
Now tell us about this newest book, Dandelion Summer. What is this one about?
This book was actually inspired by a reader friend who got in touch with me about the book. Some of the nicest letters I get are from men, actually, and he offered to help me with technical things, and in the process of getting to know him, I found out that he was a retired NASA engineer and had worked for Howard Hughes and worked on America's first moon landers. And so just learning about his history and his family sort of inspired the male character in this book, and paired him up with a teenage girl who is from sort of a disadvantaged background and needs a mentor, and so sort of a driving Miss Daisy type story.
And you said that there's a lot in this book about kind of the father-daughter relationships. Why was that a relationship you really wanted to examine?
Well, that was one of the things I gleaned from getting to know Ed and reading his emails. And I found myself printing his emails a lot and really thinking about some of the things he said and one of his regrets and all the amazing things that he's done. He's had this amazing career, but one of his regrets is that he missed a lot of time with his daughter. He was traveling all over the world and he wasn't there a lot of the time for her events and her life, basically. And so I wrote that into the character because I grew up sort of that way. I mean, I always knew my dad loved me, but my dad worked hard, and like a lot of men of his era, technology was changing fast and they worked hard and they spent a lot of time at work. So I wanted to sort of examine that and where the father and daughter end up at the end of that, and how you can come back.
Interesting. I mentioned in the beginning of the show, you just are back from a book tour and a trip to St. Louis where you won the American Christian Fiction Writers Book of the Year Award. Big congratulations. You said you've been nominated 4 times before. What was it like to win that award for this book?
It was really surprising. I guess after being nominated several times, you're just always kind of prepared not to win. And so when they called my name, it was just sort of a shock moment and sort of a, should I stand up? Because what if I heard that wrong? And so it was really exciting. It was really wonderful, and the editors were there, and it was really just a great moment.
What do you think it is about this book that really sets you apart among your peers?
Well, one thing that's a little different about me is I write for a Christian book company, and I also write for a general market book company, a mainstream company. And so that working in both markets has been a little different for me. A lot of people work in one market or the other, and I've just sort of been in both.
Gotten to try a little bit of everything. You say that you write fiction that's good for the soul. What do you mean by that?
You know, when you write, I think you write best when you're coming from where you live. And I live in a community where on Sunday mornings we get up and go to church, and faith is a big part of our lives. And so even the stories I write in mainstream, faith is a part of that story, and watching the person's journey to a point of living a really authentic life mentally and spiritually and emotionally, and finding what God has for that person is a part of the story. And so that's kind of why we call it fiction that's good for the soul.
Absolutely. Well, Lisa, we are so glad to talk to you. We are going to talk a little bit more about your personal life when we come back in just a little bit. After this break, we're going to talk with Lisa about her family and also what she says to other writers and other readers, too. Our guest today is Lisa Wingate. She's an author, but she's also the mother of 2 sons. Lisa, thanks again for being here with us. Now, you have written 16 books. How many of the 16 do you think that your 2 sons have read?
Well, I will tell you, really, they've just read 1 of the 16, just because, well, when they were younger, it was because I wasn't on AR. As soon as they figured out they couldn't get AR points for my books, they wouldn't read them anymore.
Why would you read Mom's books with
yeah,
no AR
yeah,
points?
Exactly. But they did when the second book came. 3 copies came, and they were little then, about 4th and 1st grade. And they both asked if they could have one. It was the very first copies of the book. And they both asked. So they were sitting beside me on either side on the sofa, and they were reading the book. And the younger one was following the words and whispering them. And so it was a very sweet moment. And they both did read that book. I think because it was about a town with a tornado, and there was a lot of action and things that appealed to them. And So that's the one that they have really read.
But since then, they are not your first readers every time a new book comes out.
No, they are not my first readers when a new book comes out.
Well, tell me this, how do you balance being an author and being a mom? Because you have it's a very different schedule than somebody who goes to work from 9 to 5. Do you work at home?
Yeah, I work at home, and so sometimes that's really simple and sometimes it's really complicated, because when you're working at home you can adjust your schedule, but when you're working at home you're never off work. And so sometimes that gets a little tough trying to balance things, but all in all it's been nice. It's given me the flexibility to volunteer at school and be at their events and all those things, and sometimes they get to travel with me, and my mother travels with me, and so it allows a lot of time for family that way.
When your sons get writing assignments in school, do they ask your advice?
Sometimes they do. For years they kind of were interested in writing, and then as they've gotten older they're kind of interested in their own thing. As kids get older they develop what their personalities really are, and so these days sometimes I get to read over English papers and things like that, but that's about it.
Do your sons like to read?
They do like to read, both of them, but it's the same thing. As they've gotten older, their reading tastes have gravitated toward what they're interested in. And so the older one likes history and hunting and all that sort of stuff, and so he reads about that. And the younger one's kind of more science oriented. So their reading is kind of more related to either classes they're taking or interests they have.
Yeah, like so many kids.
Yeah.
You have done a lot, especially with your online community, of encouraging book clubs, and several of your books are very popular book club selections. Why do you think book clubs are a good opportunity, especially for women?
Well, I think, books at the heart of a story. Stories are really about people. And the reason a story is our one chance to get in the mind and heart and body and soul of another person.
Really walk in someone else's shoes.
Really walk in someone else's shoes. And so I think part of that experience then is sharing that with other people, because when you read a book, you've been through a life experience through that character. And as with any life experience, there are things you want to share. And so that to me has been the most special part of the books, really, is sharing life experiences with other people.
Absolutely. What are you working on next?
Working on another book that's coming out in February for Bethany House called Blue Moon Bay, set in a little small fictional Texas town, but that's really right around Lake Whitney.
Terrific. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for coming and talking with us today. It's always a treat to get to talk with you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.